Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, the dead speak, because Travis and I have been murdered by the Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, listen to this asshole.
I can't. No. I'm being facetious, and I'm also quoting one of my favorite things about the movie. Yeah, it's that time again. It's Star Wars time, and it's the Rise of Skywalker. We got to do it, and we have way more to say about this movie than I would have thought. Before we do that, we do want to remind everybody that we have our Q&A episode coming up in February, and we are accepting Qs to A. If you go to genrevision.com, look for the post with the Riddler on it, and submit your questions in the comment section there, or email us. The email contact is on genrevision.com. You can tweet at us at genrevisionpod. However you want to get your questions to us, just get them to us, because we love the Q&A episodes, and the last one we did was one of the best ones we've ever done because we had a lot of questions. We also need to let everybody know that for this Rise of Skywalker episode, we're actually going to be doing a bonus supplemental episode for our Patreon subscribers at patreon.com/genrevision. There's a lot to say about this movie, and in this episode, we're gonna pretty much focus just on Rise of Skywalker as its own thing. We're not going to talk about its place as a trilogy ender or a saga ender or as a follow-up to the previous movie or the franchise in general. All that kind of bigger stuff we are going to do for the Patreon episode. So if you want to hear that, go to patreon.com/genrevision, become a premium subscriber. It's just $5 a month. You'll get access to that episode and our ever-growing library of additional bonus content for all these Genrevision Network shows. And last but not least, if you dig what we're doing here, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It's a currency we frankly need a lot more of at this point. And if you do leave a written review, we promise to feature it on the show. All right. Rise of Skywalker.
Skywalker.
We'll talk more about Palpy when we get past the spoiler wall.
Palpo.
Old Palps. But we do know this is Star Wars, and people take spoilers very seriously. So we're going to talk about some stuff that we think is pretty spoiler-averse up front, which means we may not talk a whole lot about plot until we get past the spoiler wall. But there's still plenty to talk about with Rise of Skywalker. At this point, I'm sure you, loyal listener, have seen it. And if you haven't, you've seen the response to it. Rise of Skywalker is potentially the messiest wide release film I saw in 2019.
I don't know, maybe that's skewed, but I do agree that Rise of Skywalker is not only a messy film, but a surprisingly messy film, which is odd because I've used similar criticisms to prior films in this franchise, but Rise of Skywalker's untidiness puts things into perspective a bit. This really is all over the place. Part of it is because it's trying to do so much and to go so many places and to introduce so many characters and resolve so many things that it really had no hope of being something compact and streamlined. It was a tall order for this movie to even exist, really, in this form.
It's true. I mean, I won't discount that, but I think this is a movie that's trying to be all things to all people. That is just not interesting to me as far as a movie with this kind of scale and scope and legacy and all that kind of stuff. Trying to be perfect to an unattainable ideal of what perfect is for an audience. It's doomed to fall flat on its face, which I think Rise of Skywalker does. And I think before we get into spoilers, we can talk about some elements we haven't seen brought up in a lot of reviews, and that is the actual filmmaking and technique in how this film is constructed that I think is a big reason it didn't work for me.
I've read criticism of J.J. Abrams many times on how he sort of constructs stories, at least from a plotting standpoint or understanding of emotional beats. But I've given credit to J.J. Abrams in the past for being a strong stylist. The Force Awakens is a strong film stylistically. His Star Trek 09 has its stylistic strengths Mission Impossible 3 is stylish, but a prototype for where he would eventually go with his cinematic aesthetic. But in The Rise of Skywalker, he's bringing back Dan Mindel, who is the cinematographer who shot Force Awakens. Yet this lacks the kind of intentionality in its construction, just cinematographically, that The Force Awakens had and it's sort of nailed almost instantly. Maybe this is because The Rise of Skywalker goes so many places and does so many things in different locations that there's just not a sense of things cohering. Maybe that's part of the issue, but also there are other cinematographic choices that affect how the movie functions at a basic level and how your brain processes it as a viewer. And I'm talking about things like, literally, how close is the camera to the actor right now?
Well, I don't want to steal your thunder because we've talked about this privately, and it's a point that I haven't seen brought up in any other reviews, and one that I think if you hadn't told me, I would have recognized in the movie regardless, because it's a very specific complaint that I've made before about other movies. But because you mentioned it, every time it clicked into place, it sucked the wind out for me every single instance that it happened. And this was when you illuminated to me how much Abrams falls back on over-the-shoulder shot, reverse shot in two-person dialogue scenes.
And you would think, working in scope, basically 2.35 to 1, it would be easier to put, say, the actor's shoulder or the back of the actor's head to get that over the shoulder reverse shot. But often he's going from one close-up to another close-up, one close-up to another close-up, back and forth ad nauseum. And it's possibly the least interesting construction for the dialogue scenes, I think, imaginable in this film, because, you take your audience to all these interesting locations and all these, very beautiful sets and things like that. These Star Wars films, to their credit, these new ones have really put the focus on building locations that have a tangibility to them. And this is one of the big failings of the prequel films, is that they failed to ground themselves in real locations. They just look like green screens.
I would never list that as a fault with these new movies, including Rise of Skywalker. It makes even potentially boring set pieces or places dynamic and interesting. Specifically, one of my favorites in this was Kylo Ren's quarters, which is this all white, very sterile Empire kind of theming to it. But as soon as we were in that room, I was like, I felt the presence of that room. I felt it was a real place. It told me something about the character in the way it was designed and where certain things in the room were set. I love that.
Certainly. But even then, I found myself desiring to have J.J. Abrams use the wide frame a little bit more. And when I say that, I mean, back that camera off, man. Just pull the fuck back. Let me see the characters inhabiting the space. And, not only does that give me a sense of geography, but it really gives me the sense that the characters are there. I mean, this is kind of an already pull for talking about a Star Wars movie, but you remember Yorgos Lanthimos is The Favorite. Like, so much of that is shot with like wide angle lenses, and they will like to a point that is almost like puzzling. They will eschew close up in that film for just letting the scene sort of play out. And it's not theatrical because the wide angle lenses and like the heavy barrel distortion really call attention to the fact you're watching a movie. So in this movie, kind of takes the opposite approach in that it wants you to get right the fuck up in the actors' faces all the time. And a close-up that close is a really powerful cinematic tool. You shouldn't use it through the whole fucking movie.
I agree. And there's other camera movement and placement choices that I think need to be brought up, specifically in the action. And JJ has this one move he loves, which is to circle the camera around, usually from, I think, left to right, and circle around a character or a ship or something to give the illusion of dynamic movement. And it's not a bad move. In fact,
this is the Bayhem technique.
Well, yes. I mean, we during or after my screening, we were talking about, you said Michael Bay has Bayhem, and you said JJ has JJ Bluster, and I said it's a Braham.
Which caused me physical pain to read that.
Yes, but it's this illusion of dynamic movement happening in the scene when they do it with Chewie at one point, who's just sitting on a log or something.
Yeah, there is a shot of the Knights of Ren just sort of standing in a location, and they do the classic Bayhem shot where it's like a helicopter shot circling around the characters. The characters are all just standing still, but the background behind them is whooshing by because they're doing this big long lens, and it's like a helicopter shot moving past. So that's just the trucking or dollying past the characters. It's kind of a standard Bayhem camera move, but really it still doesn't give me a great sense of where the characters are in space and how, and particularly in action scenes, how they're moving through space. There is a chase scene in this film. I don't think that's, giving away a whole hell of a lot, but there is a chase scene in this film that I think some people have compared even favorably to Mad Max Fury Road. But, Mad Max Fury Road's simple approach to, what kind of space are these characters occupying worked in its favor, but also placement of the camera, and, deciding which angle to cut to and when. The stuff that's going on in the Rise of Skywalker, action-wise, can't hold a candle to that sort of masterful orchestration.
I felt the action in this was closer to like a late-stage Fast and the Furious sequel. I was thinking about that during the movie. I'm like, this is like the Fast and the Furious Star Wars.
Huh.
In the sense that I was always aware of, and this is specifically talking about action scenes and particularly vehicular action or spaceships or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very aware of the camera kind of showing off in this moment and feeling kind of music video-y.
Huh.
So we've talked about the actual camera. I want to talk about the editing, which I think is one of the culprits of the movie. The editing on this movie, and I know that there's plenty of backstory about the production schedule of this and the time that was allotted to make it and post and everything was comparatively very, very rushed. I think the edit on this movie is, I'm going to say it and it's mean, I think it's atrocious.
The edit on this movie is real ugly. I mean, that's how I would describe it, but there are some times where, we cut away to something for reasons I can't even discern, but if only to, find something to put in a spot so that we can cut back to a previous plot. There are many threads in this film. Characters are in many different locations. There's lots of stuff going on. And of course, when that's happening, there's a very delicate balance of when to cut back to things and why. Star Wars has often just taken the approach of saying, instead of trying to find some sort of slick scene transition, we'll just do a wipe. That's part of the kind of classic serial charm of Star Wars.
Yeah, I now that you mention that, I don't think that happens hardly at all in Rise of Skywalker.
There are a few wipes, but really they don't call huge attention to themselves like they do to the point of parody in the prequel films.
Sure, or to the point of parody that we are aware of them as part of the filmmaking language of Star Wars. This is maybe in an attempt to move past that, but one of the common criticisms I've seen label at the movie is how breakneck it is, at how speedy everything is in the story. And while that certainly has to have some origin in the script, I think it's even more so a fault of the edit. The edit makes everything feel like, it doesn't matter if we spent 5 minutes with a couple characters talking about whatever plot stuff is going on, everything feels like it just took 5 seconds. There was a point in the movie where I looked away for 2 seconds because somebody in my row was making some noise, and I wanted to look over and see what was going on because it was...
Give him the fucking mean mug is what you wanted to
do. I'm not going to get specific, but it was... I just didn't know what the noise was. It wasn't like talking or anything. But I looked over, and it could not have been more than 2 seconds. And I looked over, I saw what was happening, I looked back, and something had happened with a character and put them in a position where I was like, what? How did that happen? I looked away for 2 seconds. And in that 2 seconds, so much visual information was conveyed that I felt completely lost. And there's an argument to be made like, well, you're supposed to be completely devoted to the movie you're watching and pay attention and everything. But if 2 seconds means a huge amount of plotting seems to have happened that I feel lost. I think that's the fault of the edit.
Well, I mean, I can't really speak to that one specific instance. I know exactly what it is you're talking about because you told me earlier what it is that happened, and I do agree it happens quickly. But the problem for me with this edit, primarily in that it's trying to cram so much into a 2.5 hour running time, that the movie really doesn't give us any time for a moment to last or for any moment to become especially memorable. Something that The Force Awakens had, because it's a more slight movie and it's not a whole bunch shorter. I don't think it's 2 hours, 12 minutes, something like that. And then of course Last Jedi had this as well, is moments for the story to breathe and for an effective mood to be established, even in just a single shot. Where a character is alone with their thoughts and we're focusing on the emotionality of what's happening. There's so little of that in Rise of Skywalker that it's kind of fucking criminal. Really what we're here to see is what's going to happen to the characters, right? I mean, that's the whole experiment in this serial kind of storytelling, right? Ideally, we should be in love with these characters. We should care about what's going to happen to them. Ideally, we should also care about how they feel, and they should be able to convey to us how we feel in a way that doesn't feel rote expository.
The way that I described it to you is that this movie feels like, instead of being like laid out on a cork board with like beat cards and kind of a flow to the story, it feels like it was written on the sidewalk in chalk in a hopscotch pattern.
And well, I mean, characters are literally hopping around in hyperspace from here to there to there to there to go from this place to that place.
We've had that in other Star Wars movies before, and it doesn't feel this noticeable or egregious. It's not that is inherently the problem. It is these things that we're talking about in the editing, in the construction of scenes in the script. It just feels like J.J. Abrams threw a stone to the number 10 spot, and every single spot that he's hopping on is every little plot point along the way without stopping to consider the ramifications or the emotional weight of those moments.
Yes, and this is kind of a J.J. Abrams signature problem. Very early on in my tenure on this podcast, back when we were still called The Drew Reviews, you and I spoke about a film called Super 8. And in that movie, there are several moments where things happen and characters do things that are entirely unmotivated. And while there is some effort put into characters having a motivation in this film, it still feels like bullshit because it's not properly established and we're really not all that sure how these characters feel. And you're saying, well, do you want these characters to sit around and talk about how they feel? Honestly, it wouldn't fucking hurt.
That honestly, that when you frame it like that, that sounds boring. That is the core of the majority of drama.
Yes.
Very little of that happens in Rise of Skywalker. And this is a fundamental approach J.J. Abrams has to this kind of filmmaking. Chris Pine brought it up when they were doing the junkets for the first Star Trek movie, about how J.J. Abrams literally says, don't worry about what you're saying. Just run in, say it really fast, and the audience won't care.
Yep. Do it with brevity and conviction, and the audience will be along for the ride, basically.
And I can understand that philosophy, but when your core motivating principle is the audience won't care. How
cynical and shitty is that?
I mean, yes, it is. And it becomes especially prevalent in this movie. Now, we've talked a little bit. The only other kind of technical thing I do want to touch on before we get to spoilers and plotting and all that stuff that I know people want to hear, I do want to talk about the music.
Okay.
Because this is most likely John Williams' goodbye to Star Wars. And I put out a tweet sometime earlier this week saying that I really think John Williams is kind of the hero of the Star Wars franchise. That even in movies that are bad in the series, he has never done anything but bring his A game.
Of course.
Always. He's a master for a reason. I think that's still true of Rise of Skywalker. He's still bringing it, and he's reminding me, some of these new themes you created, they resonate with me. You've still fucking got it, man. You're still the master of melodies.
Right. His music does a lot of heavy lifting.
It does for this movie. There is clearly, and I don't know if this was a directive from Abrams, there's clearly a desire to kind of hit on a lot of recognizable motifs from the series in this movie.
Yeah.
Those were the moments that kind of pulled me out of the movie. That felt a little too on the nose, wink winky, nudging you in the shoulder like, hey, you remember this? And it's like, I kind of liked the stuff that felt new, that was the newer themes that felt, those were the musical elements that really hit with me this time around. But every time they would come across, something in the plot that called back to a previous movie and they had to play this little bit, I was like, all right, we have to do this. And I understand the motivation behind it. And it's even as a farewell of sorts. We got to do your greatest hits. Mm-hmm. But that's the stuff that kind of, it's the only stuff that I took big notice of.
It's Star Wars. It's a total overload on leitmotif. Themes for characters and themes for ideas.
Sure.
It's been there since day one with Star Wars. The nature of that doesn't really bother me. I don't have any issues with the score for Rise of Skywalker. There's
times that the familiar stuff there's a moment, a big triumphant reveal moment in the climax where that main theme kicks in and I was like, this is it. Like, the actual what's going on screen, I'm not invested in, but the music is making me invested in it.
Right. It reminds you of that feeling, that signature feeling.
Mm-hmm.
The music is doing its job even when other things aren't. And that certainly aids in some certain scenes. But, I think what we're kind of getting at here with all of these criticisms, except for maybe about the cinematography and the blocking and things like that, is like the main issue is that it's trying to be not a particularly great Star Wars movie. It's trying to be a most Star Wars movie.
Yes.
Oh, their prior movies lacked in lightsaber fights. Well, let's pack in the most lightsaber fights. We didn't visit enough new planets. People like new planets. Let's put in a lot of new planets. People like new starships. Let's pack in a lot of starships. It just seems to be a sort of a maximalist approach of more is better. And I can't deny that. I think for a certain slice of the public, that is how they understand better. We talk about award season and prestige films. It's often like best acting often goes to the most acting. But this is the most Star Wars in this trilogy. And I think that's a rather considerable accomplishment, although not a good one, in Force, since Force Awakens, which was just an overload on, like nostalgia props and things like that. Hey, recognize this little droid,
Well, and that's all back.
Yeah.
That is clearly Abrams's jam, is to, hey, remember this all the time to you. And if that's what certain people get a kick out of, is just knowing things, cool. But for me, it gets to a point where I just want you to make new things.
Mm-hmm. And there are lots of new things in this film.
There are, but okay, let's cross the spoiler wall and talk about plot. Because if you're this far and you're frowning or angry because we don't like this, don't worry. Because when we cross the spoiler wall, I promise that I'm going to kick it off with one of the biggest positives about the movie.
Sure.
So here we go. Spoilers from here on out. When it was revealed that Emperor Palpatine would be returning for this movie, I abhorred that idea. It immediately stank to me of the worst kind of fan service, completely unmotivated. Just throw him in there because he's a thing people like. Ian McDiarmid and Emperor Palpatine are by far the best things in this movie.
Oh, no question. His campy horror villain approach to playing this character is pretty delicious, frankly.
It reminds you, and I know this is a now kind of memed thing about Star Wars, that this is a movie about space wizards intended for children. Like, he reminds you, don't take this too seriously, because I'm not taking this too seriously. Because every line that I deliver is like this.
It's perfectly arch.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And the movie, like, I had the dead speak joke in the opening, but I like that kind of acknowledgement of this is ridiculous. Love that aspect of it. So when the opening crawl starts with "the dead speak" and an exclamation point. I'm like, yay! And the opening of this movie has Kylo Ren going to meet the Emperor. This is like the best thing in the movie, and actually set me up, because I read all the, the critical reaction and was going in with very low expectations and kind of like, I don't think this is going to be very good. And then this first scene happened where the Emperor is basically revealed to be an evil dead Deadite.
Yeah, exactly. And Kylo Ren, and then of course there's a lot of lightsaber igniting in this movie. The characters will ignite their lightsabers just kind of like whenever, because the studies and data show that people come when you do that. So Kylo Ren lands on this planet Exegol, which is the Sith home planet. He walks out of his TIE fighter, he ignites his lightsaber, and then Kylo Ren walks across a big flat blue plane until he gets to a big set of double doors. He walks inside, it looks like the mines of Moria, and then he gets to an evil laboratory. And when they found out, like, oh, it's an evil laboratory, and they do the very quick explanation of like, actually Snoke was just a puppet controlled by the Emperor the whole time.
It's revealed twofold. I don't care about Snoke explanation bullshit. What I care about is that the Emperor delivers the line like, "I made Snoke," and then we see,
"I have been every voice inside your head."
Yes, but then when he says like, "I made Snoke," cut to jar full of Snokes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I laughed. I was like, okay, I don't care about Snoke's explanation. I don't give a shit about any of that. But doing it like that, which is kind of blissfully stupid.
I like that he's keeping a couple around just in case.
But then they do the reveal of the Emperor, where it's this extreme close up where he's on the right of the frame. He's got his hood on. We can't see his face, and there's just lightning strikes happening on this planet all the time. So we get flashes of his face, and each time the light flashes, it reveals a little bit more about him. Ooh, his lips are all black and almost look like they're bleeding. Oh, his irises are gone. His eyes are all white. Oh my God, his fingers are like bony nubs. I was like, this rules.
Yeah, I mean, it's such good horror imagery, I think. Like, it's bringing that horror to the forefront. The score is doing cool stuff here. I was into this. The only thing I don't like about the Exegol stuff is like Exegol is pretty much just a big blue flat plane much of the time.
While these new Star Wars movies, I give them incredible props for all their production value. It's kind of become expected at this point that they have a certain level of production value that is still impressive and worth complimenting. This is still a movie where I can't really name a whole lot of interesting spaces.
Yeah, well, I think another big issue with me is that this is very blue monochrome on this planet, which is kind of an uninteresting look because there's a lot of blue stuff happening, and we come back here and there's two blue lightsabers on the blue planet with the blue lightning, and it's like, give me a little something else, please.
But I wish the Emperor was in this movie 3 times more than he is, because every line McDiarmid delivers is gold, and I'm not saying this ironically. If anybody thinks it's like, oh, you're just because it's fun, it's like, no, this is awesome.
Yeah, no, and I love the reuse of a line from Revenge of the Sith, which I don't think is a good movie, but that moment where they reveal his face and he goes, "The dark side is a path to powers many consider to be unnatural," or whatever the line is, and for them to use that, like, Kylo's like, "I thought you died," or "I thought you were dead," and he does the unnatural line. I was like, this is where this belongs. It feels right. I know it's been said exactly the same way before, but it just feels right. It's executed correctly.
Well, this is where like that nostalgia baiting and intention of wanting you to feel the way you felt when you originally saw Star Wars as a kid again. This is the only time in the movie that happened to me, is when the Emperor was on screen doing his thing. I mean, at one point he even says, "Do it." And I'm like, oh my God, that's from Revenge of the Sith, and it's stupid. I think I might say it in Return of the Jedi too. I don't know, but I was just like,
well, there's the same use of the old verbiage, strike me down.
Sure, it's the exact same. He's like, I will be the ruler of the Sith. And I could listen to Ian McDiarmid say Skywalker over and over again. It's delicious. It's a delicious performance, and it's the best thing in the movie by a country mile.
So there's a whole bunch of other shit going on in this movie.
The plotting of this movie, it's not that it's nonsensical, because somebody will come in and be like, I know exactly what was going on and could follow everything.
I feel like I had a pretty good grasp on where they were going and why, but I take issue with the fact that it's all motivated by props.
Well, not just that it's MacGuffins.
I have to have this prop in my possession in order to go to this next location.
Yes, not that it's just MacGuffins, but yet again, Abrams in Force Awakens, his big MacGuffin was a map, is this thing that will take you to another place. He does that with 3 different things in this movie. Mm-hmm. All the MacGuffins are, it's not a thing that we need. It's not, an Infinity Stone or something. Everything is a map. That to me is so indicative of the thought process behind the writing of this. That's where my hopscotch comparison comes in, where it's just everything is just a number that leads to the next number that you need to jump to. And maybe that's able to be executed. Maybe it's even been executed in other Star Wars movies successfully, but it's so apparent, and the way that it's done in this movie just feels really dumb.
Yeah, it's very it's a little D&D, and that's not an insult to D&D. I just don't think it makes for an interesting structure for this film. Where they're on the quest for the next magical item, and it's like, okay, I understand that Star Wars is, more so a fantasy kind of film, but the dependence on these props, I think it belies the weaknesses at the heart of the film.
Well, and there's other stuff there's stuff in this movie that is, I cannot believe made it to the final screen, because it just screams of being inconsequential. There's a huge deal with this Sith dagger that has some inscription on it, and C-3PO reads it and knows what it is, but he can't translate it because it's forbidden by his protocol or whatever. So the only way they're going to be able to get him to translate it is to wipe his memory. Mm-hmm. And it's this big emotional scene of he's gonna forget everything, but we'll read the MacGuffin that will tell us the next place we need to go. And it's this, we're gonna lose C-3PO. And I won't lie, I was like, that's good stakes. Like, I don't like the MacGuffinry of this, but sacrificing C-3PO, which has been, sacrificing the older characters has been a running theme in these new movies. I was like, okay, cool. That makes me feel something. Only for the movie at the end to be like, don't worry, his memory was backed up by R2-D2. That never happened.
And even after they wipe his memory, he's still just 3PO, and they make a joke of him like not knowing anybody's name. It's like, well, he's still just the comic relief droid bumbling around.
Right, he hasn't changed.
Really, not a whole lot has changed about the dynamic.
I mean, it should have killed him completely or something.
I think so.
If they wanted the stakes to really matter. But they don't. They don't want the stakes to really matter.
Well, keep in mind, at this point in the film, Poe and Finn and Rey all believe Chewbacca is dead and that it is Rey's fault.
Which is an interesting moment in the movie, that Rey is trying to use her powers to bring down this ship she thinks Chewbacca has been taken prisoner on. And in your anger, you killed her. In her anger at seeing Kylo Ren at this moment and fighting against him, lightning shoots out of her hands and she blows up the ship and she thinks she killed Chewie. That is good character drama, only 2 minutes later to reveal that don't worry, Chewie's fine.
Yeah, at no point is that scene actually staged like they've really suffered a tragedy.
Right.
There are scenes, I think, on the ship they find on Pasana, the desert planet, where they're talking about how upset they are that Chewie's gone. But, the film skips over these things with such a lightness and brevity as to not effectively convey the weight. If Chewie is to die in this film, we, I think, as people who love Chewbacca and have loved Chewbacca as a culture since 1977, want to see a scene of that sort of gravity have gravity to it.
And have gravity for the character, because if you convey that it has genuine gravity for the characters, that's supposed to radiate onto us, the audience.
Yeah, the only time I really felt the gravity of anything like that in this film is when Leia dies, and when Chewie finds out, Chewie breaks down.
Yes, he yells,
and I was like, he lets out this pained yelp, and falls to his knees, and I was like, this is the one time the movie got me. All right, you managed to wring out the tear sponge a little bit.
I won't lie. I was thinking about Nicolas Cage's Mandy freak out in that moment. I was thinking about, like, I want Chewbacca to just start kicking shit over and just be pissed off. Like, because I agree with you. I was like, oh, I feel this. We have not talked about Leia. We have to talk about Leia because obviously Carrie Fisher has been gone for a while now. This movie is using archival footage of her, placing that footage of her face on doubles at times. In a weird way, this is creepier to me than the full CGI, like Tarkin and Rogue One type stuff.
I think the way that they've used Carrie Fisher's likeness and also footage from deleted scenes and things like that, the way that they've used it in this film is unfortunate. I would also say it feels kind of macabre.
Well, it's also that it never feels like Leia the character is actually sharing space with the people she's talking to. Again, pretty much every one of her scenes is that over-the-shoulder shot, reverse shot.
Mm-hmm. And they'll have a double. And
they have a double. There's always this clear, fuzzy halo around her hair or around the edges of her face that separate her from the background.
Yeah, the kind of CGI that they've used to incorporate the prior footage and things like that into the new stuff. I mean, it's obvious if you know what you're looking for. What I find to be the worst thing about it is that, there are lines that she said that we didn't hear in previous movies that she had recorded for those movies, and they tried to put every ounce of it into this film. And it's really the same tactic that they used with Don Rickles and Toy Story 4.
Mm-hmm.
They had a couple of lines. They figured, okay, well, we have this person saying this line. What could we do to build the scene around this line? And then the one moment comes in the scene for her to say the line, and she says the line, and that's pretty much it. And they have like a couple of reaction shots of her just sort of like frowning that they use whenever. And it's like, well, that maybe they got that when, the camera was rolling and she wasn't doing a take. Like any frame of footage they found, like there's some stuff I feel that is kind of cobbled together in a way. Like she had one line that I felt was like, that sounded so digitally artificial. I'm like, that's probably 2 or 3 lines cut together.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nearly as tasteless, I think, as doing like a full CGI Leia, but still it feels like there's a big string and a plastic ring on her back that they'll just pull and she'll say some bit of fortune cookie wisdom and then the scene ends.
And I mean, obviously it's the most unfortunate possible situation. And I get it. Like there's no real good way out of that obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
There's just not, because you can't kill her off screen before the movie starts. That's impossible.
I mean, you could. People wouldn't like it, but I think people would have been understanding given that Carrie Fisher passed away.
I'm surprised Leia is in the movie as long as she is.
Yeah. There are a couple things they had to accomplish using a double, I believe with some prosthetic makeup on, some face makeup. It's, I think, 1 or 2 shots where she's in silhouette, she's backlit, all the light is behind her, and she goes and she lies down on a bed. And I was like, this is somebody with a mask on.
It's something. Whatever it is, it's clear that it's not her. Okay, so there's that. There's so many more people to talk about. I mean, let's talk about who's supposed to be driving this entry and
you use that as an Adam Driver pun, I'm gonna slap you.
Well, ha ha ha. No, it's Rey and Ben or Kylo Ren. I think the best thing about this trilogy, and probably one of the best things about Rise of Skywalker, is that they had Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. They are delivering the performance that they need to deliver with total conviction, with
Earnestness.
Earnestness, yeah. That you know, with an understanding of the emotions of these characters that I think is honestly better than what they're given on the page for this movie.
I think they're giving probably the best performances they could given the material that they were given to work with.
And it's still good. I mean, I genuinely looked forward to whenever they were having scenes together. Unfortunately, that's all undercut by the entirety of their dialogue always having to do with plot motivating factors. There aren't the kind of scenes that we've had. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I'll do it. I'll use my one card, my Last Jedi card. The scenes that they had in that movie where it wasn't so much talking about plot, it was building their relationship. What do they feel about each other? How are they reacting to each other? What are they drawing out of each other? That's not really happening in Rise of Skywalker here. It's all just, actually, there's some more plot stuff that you didn't know about that I'm going to tease you with. Cut away. Don't worry. When we have our next dialogue scene, I'll bring that back up.
Yeah. One of the problems, again, with this being the most Star Wars and having to stuff so much in is that the dialogue then becomes a tool to convey necessary information. And there's so much fucking information. I mean, there's a subplot about this Jedi hunter that killed Rey's parents, and you see his little hologram in one shot, and then you actually get a close-up of him in a flashback, and it's like all of this information that really could have gone by the wayside. They're just packing it in there. And this forces the characters to have to use dialogue to convey it. When the characters could be using dialogue to actually explore their mental states and their relationships. And so much of it, you know, even when they're trying to convey character stuff, fortune cookie wisdom, as I call it in this particular film, when they're trying to, it all rings hollow in the end. You know, there is this thing that Leia says to Rey early on in the movie, and it probably comes from a deleted scene from The Force Awakens, where she says, "Rey, never be afraid of who you are." Well, we find out in this film that Rey is Rey Palpatine. She is Senator Palpatine's granddaughter.
Destined to become Empress Palpatine.
Yes, which, sure. This comes up in a scene like when she goes to Pisana, and there's this big festival happening. There's like this alien species that has this big festival on Pisana once every, I don't know, trip around whatever sun they're orbiting around. But this little alien girl comes up and talks to Rey and wants to know her name and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, she's like, "I'm Rey." And then, of course, the kid's like, "What's your last name?" And Rey's like, "I'm just, you know, just Rey." And, of course, the movie wants to put a point home there. It's like, oh, she's still looking for an identity. And, you know, family is important because Star Wars is a family soap opera, family melodrama. And we know this from, you know, many hours of sitting through these movies. And then, of course, later on in the end, you know, one of the last lines, or no, it is the last line of the movie when somebody asks Rey, "Who are you?" And she says, "I'm Rey Skywalker." Fuck off. What? Why? Never be afraid of who you are? Now you're concealing your identity again from somebody's name? Like the ghosts are nodding over your shoulder like, "Oh, it's okay. You can totally use my name." What?
Well, okay.
Never be afraid of who you are.
Okay, so Rey is a Palps.
Mm-hmm.
When Emperor Palpatine was announced to come back, it was like the most obvious non-twist of all time. It's like, oh, that's what they're doing. Why else is he going to come back? Even if that wasn't the case, the way the movie acts upon it, the first scene with the Emperor, you know, he's like, "You have no idea who she is." So Kylo Ren has to be like, "Who is she?" Cut to Emperor Evil Dead smiling. Cut away. Kylo and Rey have a scene talking about it. He's like, "Your parents were nobodies because they chose to be nobodies. You don't know who you really are." "Who am I?" Cut away. Don't worry. It's like, guys, this is... There's no reason to string this out, and I'm sorry it just doesn't have the impact that I think you thought it had. And even if it didn't have the impact, what could be interesting from that is the fallout, is what does that change about Rey? And of course, it's the usual, like, she has a scene where she's like, "I'm going to find Palpatine and destroy him." And Finn has to be like, "That doesn't sound like you, Rey." And then, of course, she has the vision of herself as evil Rey.
Woof. This is another one of those things. This is another one of those things that, like, had the movie given it a fucking minute to actually, like, have atmosphere, like the sort of slow motion Luke confronts spectral Vader on Dagobah, like that. It's slow motion because Irvin Kershner wanted that moment to last and have impact. And the scene and the shot of Vader's decapitated head showing Luke's face through the front of the mask, like he wanted this moment to have lasting impact. And the way that they rattle shit off in Rise of Skywalker, you're Senator Palpatine's granddaughter. It's like you couldn't find a more impactful way to convey this information with like a little more visualness. And the evil Rey thing is just like that. It's just a gag that they throw out there. It barely lasts 15 seconds, if that.
In case you didn't know that was evil Rey, don't worry. She's going to pull an evil Bilbo Baggins moment.
They steal scary Bilbo. I mean, they pretty much, they purloin that scene out of Fellowship of the Ring directly.
I was flabbergasted and giggled my ass off when that happened.
But not for good reasons.
No, completely ironically, where it's like, this is awful.
They don't even give her prosthetic teeth. They just give her like, flash of digital teeth. It looks like shit, man. And, to commend the movie on its use of digital elements in certain things, like I respect the fact that they've learned that people like practical creatures. And not just in Star Wars, like people are really expecting a return to physical things on set, being there in the frame, sharing the space with the actors.
Hey, I mean, Werner Herzog.
Yeah, Werner Herzog. Yeah, he's the best puppet I've ever seen.
Well, Werner Herzog on the set of The Mandalorian calling when they were like, we're going to remove the practical Baby Yoda to do something digital, and he called them cowards. It's like, yes, that is exactly what you should say to these people. And it's clear. And thankfully, I give Abrams full credit for instilling that as a mandate in Force Awakens, that he wanted practical shit. He wanted puppets. He wanted people in costumes. He wanted that giant pig thing with its huge ass in The Force Awakens. Like, and I will never forget that pig's ass.
Even Al Pacino was really impressed with that thing's ass.
Yeah, so that does carry through in Rise of Skywalker. Everybody's loving that must be mandated plushy thing. The Porg of this movie is the little droid mechanic, Babu Frick, and it's got to have the cutesy voice and stuff. And yeah, it's crass and obvious. I liked it. Like I have to succumb and be like, yeah, it worked on me. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. I don't like that it did, but it did.
Sure. But it's also things like Maz Kanata, who has been entirely digital in the two previous films when she showed up in her little roles. And this one, she's a puppet that stands around and has a few lines, and then her facial animation is digitally assisted. It's like, oh, there's a real thing there. That's nice.
Even that giant worm thing that Rey heals, that head is practical.
Yeah, it looks good. It's like a nice mix between an anaconda and a graboid. I wish they had fucking pulled the camera back a few feet and really shown the relationship, the size relationship between the thing and Rey, because it's like, fucking go, got a wider angle, god damn it.
Yeah.
There's also another thing that I was surprised to see returning from prior Star Wars films, and that's a practical planet explosion. They blow up Kijimi, which is a snow planet-ish in this movie.
Was that one? I don't remember.
It is. That's the one that Babu Frick and Zori Bliss are on.
Oh, right. That's like the laziest Mos Eisley Cantina moment in any of these, because all of them have had that moment. Mm-hmm. And this one's just like, yeah, walk through. Hey, look, John Williams.
Yeah, hey, John Williams with a big,
goggle,
Harry Potter 4 eye patch on.
Oh, I was thinking of the City of Lost Children Cyclops people.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's a better pull.
But yeah, that's right. They blow up the Kathy and Jimmy planet, whatever.
You know what it's called. Shut up.
I think that's actually why it's called that. I think it was a joke on that.
Kijimi?
Yeah.
You're lucky he didn't name it after another Beastie Boys song.
Right. But yeah, when they blow it up, there are practical elements there, like good. And I was like, because you told me about that, so I was on the lookout for that when it happened. I was like, oh, I mean, it looks like it's been digitally assisted.
A little bit.
You can tell. It's like, yeah, that's a real spark from a real thing.
Yeah.
Hey.
They really shot a model blowing up on a soundstage in slow motion, and it looks pretty good. Looks pretty cool.
Good on them.
Small favors, It's exactly what you said when I told you. It's like small favors.
And that's really kind of how I feel. I even Palpy, who I can't believe how thrilled I was at his inclusion in the larger game of Rise of Skywalker, it doesn't save it, man.
No. So many of the emotional beats are just unearned bullshit. Like that's one thing that, J.J. Abrams has carried with him through so many things. And, it's happened in Star Trek Into Darkness. And in his better films, you get caught up enough in it for it not to matter. Like, particularly when stakes aren't all that high. Like in Force Awakens, it's kind of an opening act of a film. Stakes aren't terribly high. We're being introduced to new things. The bluster feels like it makes sense. In this, it knows that it's having to deliver on certain things that people are expecting it to deliver. It's checking boxes, right? And it knows that at a certain point in the film, this has to happen. X has to happen. At this point in the film, Kylo Ren has to then swear off being evil. He loses his eye scar. He tosses his old nasty lightsaber over the side of the Death Star wreckage into the seas. And it's like, okay, I know you're telling me that this happened and that you've earned this moment, but I don't know how you've earned this moment. And there's just so many moments like that in Rise of Skywalker. How did the earning of Rey using the Skywalker name at the end? And I'm not precious about this. I just don't understand like how she came to that decision, or emotionally what led her there. Especially when she's told not to be afraid of who she is, and her choosing this new identity in the last few still just kind of undercuts that in a big way. And then there's this kiss shared between Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley at the moment where they save one another after nearly dying at the hands of the Emperor, and they kiss. Why do they kiss? Because somebody felt that that's just what should happen at that point during the movie.
Yeah, not that it was motivated by any kind of character history or specific emotion in the scene. It's just, that's what you're supposed to do, right? So let's do it.
There's a little hint at sexual tension in the prior film in the franchise, one that was mostly used for comedic effect, and I thought it was pretty funny. And like, memes were made out of, Kylo Ren being shirtless.
Right.
But like, that does not an effective romance make. Like, I'm not saying romance was off the table for these characters, but
Well, here, I think I know the one element of Rise of Skywalker that sums up its attitude and its greater failing. It's the fact that in this movie, Kylo Ren reconstructs the mask that he broke. It's never said why. It's waved off very comedically in a line, and it's just because fuck you, that's why. Because this is what I want to do, and this is what it's supposed to be, and that's it. Moving on. Don't stop and think about it.
Sure, well, I mean, but if you do think about it, it's like, well, okay, at the end of the previous flick, he's now the supreme leader of the First Order. He's this, like, impetuous, bratty kid who is pissed off that the adults in his life who he feels have failed him have, kind of one-upped him and bested him. He's raging at the beginning of this movie, sort of carrying through that sort of impetuous rage and slaughtering a whole bunch of people on this planet to find a Sith wayfinder. And then he reconstructs his mask because he uses that, to hide his emo nature.
If you want to justify it using the last movie, that's fair. It's not justified in this movie.
Right. Well, I mean, in The Force Awakens, the mask was kind of scary. Even when they were making jokes at the mask's expense, like when, it's still one of my favorite lines in The Force Awakens when they pull up Poe Dameron on the fucking desert planet and Poe Dameron makes a voice like, I can't understand you with all the apparatus. And I thought that was, oh, that's cool. Here it's not scary. It's just kind of expected because they think people like it. It's like lightsabers. Oh, people will ignite lightsabers and pants will be filled, man.
I just feel that is kind of a key to unlocking what I feel is one of the great problems of Rise of Skywalker, is that it's just going to do things and keep moving and expects you not to think about it in the movie that you're watching and go with it. And that kind of motivation is the illusion of drama. It's not actually drama, but it feels like it because the movie never stops. It just keeps going, so you feel that it's exciting. But if you stop for even 1 second to consider what's going on and why characters are doing things, the motivations in scenes, the motivations to arcs, which I don't know. I mean, we didn't even talk about like Finn and Poe. Their arc is that they got to be leaders.
Well, I mean, we learned from the prior film in the franchise that Poe had a lot of learning to do when it came to being a leader, and that's I expected this film to sort of deliver on that. Like, of course, now he's general, but then he makes Finn co-general because he can't do it without Finn because they're buddies.
What is Finn's arc? Tell me Finn's arc in this movie. Do it.
Do it. Do it.
Kill him.
Well, he does find somebody who has a similar past as him, but that really doesn't tell us a whole lot about himself. It's a little bit of world building. He finally steps up and does the big thing, which he also did in the first movie.
And the last movie.
Kind of nothing, kind of nowhere.
There you go. Also, talking about that character that he meets, the revelation that stormtroopers are seemingly a lot of people of color and women. There's a lot of women stormtroopers being killed in this.
Yeah, you hear a lot of women's voices as stormtroopers, and also you see a lot of women First Order officers standing around.
Yeah, yay, diversity in evil. I don't know, the whole idea of them being these people who have been captured and brainwashed and also seem to primarily now in the First Order be people of color and women. I don't know. That kind of makes all the fun shooting them in hallway stuff subtly darker.
Subtly? No, I mean, that's when you think about it, it's utterly horrifying. But, other movies have dealt with similar issues like this, like The Matrix. The Matrix has a scene where Neo and Trinity walk into a lobby of an office building, a government building inside the Matrix, and they shoot a whole bunch of people. And we already know that if a person dies in the Matrix, it dies in real life. So it's like there's a whole bunch of like army guys and security guys that they're just ripping to shreds. It's not clear if they're programs or not. Are they humans? We kind of assume they're humans. And Neo and Trinity are doing this in the name of religious extremism.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with you on I mean, we'll have to do another Matrix episode.
But like, at least the Matrix knows that it's about religious extremism.
Well, that's the thing. What is the Rise of Skywalker about? And don't use it's about 2 hours and blah, blah, blah joke.
What's a Henway?
Right.
So, Rise of Skywalker really, I don't think is anything about more than what the metatextual knowledge is, in that it's trying to land this ship with as smooth a landing as it can, trying to deliver on this massive laundry list of things that they know people will expect from this film, not only because it is a Star Wars film, but it is a 9th film in a series, and people are expecting dangling threads from 9 previous films to be collected and resolved here. It's an extraordinarily tall order. I think it's an unfairly long and complicated list of things for this to deliver on. And when you construct a movie around this huge laundry list of things that are expecting from it, it can't help but be sort of a overly focused, grouped non-art. It's a product. I mean, and there is so little artfulness to this film that it astounds me. And then I don't mean to discount all of the artistry that went into this. Like, whoever designed Zori Bliss's helmet, kudos. It's a really cool looking helmet. I appreciate the artistry that's on display there.
Yeah, don't show Carrie Russell's face though. Don't ever do that.
She's got great eyes though. I mean, come on, she's Carrie Russell, and they give her some great smoky eye makeup.
They do, and that helmet is cool. I give. Of all the Star Wars that has happened, I think one of its greatest assets is that, yeah, they get really good concept artists on these movies. And the people who have to fabricate from those designs do a bang-up job.
Absolutely. There's a reason these movies have persisted for so long. It's like there's so many cool visual ideas in them. And yet, I feel that there was a distinct lack of cool visual ideas in this film because it's having to bring back all these older elements to tell an ending to the story. That's what Rise of Skywalker is really about, is trying to tie all this up together in a way that the most people possible will be satisfied.
I think that's a doomed to fail approach with storytelling.
Well, you and Danielle have spoken about the curse of the third movie in your podcast, Third Time's the Charm. Third films, by and large, don't really get a fair shake because people expect them to wrap things up nicely. And
I think that's something that we can kind of delve into in the Patreon episode.
Yeah.
Is this movie's status as a third movie? Because there's definitely, I have sympathies for it in that arena.
Agreed.
But as its own singular piece of filmmaking, of storytelling,
it's a bad time.
This is a bad movie. And it sucks to say, like, I'm not happy about saying that. And I'm not saying that if you, loyal listener, enjoyed Rise of Skywalker, that you're wrong or anything. Because, like I said, and like we both said, this is a movie that is going to work for certain viewers, because if there's a box that you're looking to get checked and it checks that box, that's going to do it.
Yeah, maybe you'll walk away happy. And really, you know, if you're looking to have a good time at the movie theater and you go, I hope you do have a good time. Like, I hope you have fun at the movies. That's really the whole point of this, right? It's entertainment. If you don't have at least a little fun, I feel like some of that's on you. Like, you and I had at least a little fun watching this movie. Thanks largely to the Emperor. But
I was going to say, if one of the boxes you want checked is I want to see more Emperor Palpatine, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was a box I wanted checked. And when it turned out that it was, buddy, oh my god.
I even love when they go to like Ultra Palpatine, like after he force sucks all of the.
Yes, okay, so in this ending sequence, I want to end on Palpatine because he is the joy of the movie.
Yeah,
he's talking about like
a dyad in the Force.
He's like, Rey, you'll strike me down and I'll possess your body and all this stuff. But then when Kylo Ren shows up and they're going to face him, he's like, oh, I can suck out your Force and rejuvenate myself. And he's sucking out their Force jism. It's like ectoplasm or something. And he's like, oh, I feel the power again. And his eyes light back up. I'm like, I don't give a shit.
He gets the characteristic like facial ridges that we saw in Return of the Jedi and Revenge of the Sith. Like, he starts to really look like his old self again.
He looks good, man.
Because before, he just looks like Ian McDiarmid with like black lips and cataract eyes.
He looks like he straight up looks like, oh gosh, Ellen Sandweiss when she gets possessed in the first Evil Dead.
Yeah, there's some good horror Deadite shit, you know.
She looks exactly like him, but then he gets rejuvenated. His clothes also get colored.
He gets a brand new outfit.
When he sucks out their Force.
Oh, and he doesn't need to hover around on a giant robot arm anymore.
No, and
which I'm kind of bummed about because the robot arm's kind of fucking cool.
The GLaDOS robot arm was super cool. I loved that. Well, you said it, and it was so funny because when you said it to me, I had just seen the same reference on Twitter like 10 minutes or something before, when it's like he's like Dr. Chenard from Hellraiser 2. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my god, this is brilliant. And then when he becomes Super Palps and is just, doing he's gonna fling Ben Solo over a cliff, and he's like, as I fell. I was like, man, I'm getting this super cut off of YouTube when it happens, because I didn't know this was going to be the absolute winner of the movie. God bless Ian McDiarmid. God bless Emperor Palpatine. Rise of Palpatine is what I say.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we will talk more, because there's a whole lot more to talk about, because it's Star Wars. So there'll be a lot more discussed in our Patreon bonus episode. So go listen to that if you're one of our Patreon subscribers. But let's head on over to the shelf, where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want to encourage you, loyal listeners, to go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode, which I'm sure we'll be getting lots of comments for this one. And I want shelf picks. Y'all need to deliver some awesome shelf picks in the comments for this episode. I want to hear them. All right, I'm going to go first this time. This might be an easy pull, but it really does bear comparison. It's another sci-fi trilogy ender, and it's one, in a sense, that we alluded to in the episode. This is The Matrix Revolutions, and I did an episode of this with Nick. I would be very interested to revisit these movies with you, Travis, in some form, because I find them eternally fascinating, even if they're not totally successful in what they're doing. And with The Matrix Revolutions, I think it is I would say 60-40, maybe 70-30, unsuccessful to successful, but it feels uncompromising in its vision. It feels, as much as it is a third movie and has to be subjected to the third movie criticisms that all third movies get, it is committed to itself. It is not trying to recapture what it thinks people loved about the first Matrix. It is telling its story. It's telling its story with a sense of finality. It's doing what it wants to do, and it's taking its time doing it. It doesn't feel like a rushed movie, which I would say Rise of Skywalker does feel that in a number of ways. And for everything that doesn't work in the Matrix Revolutions, there's something kind of miraculous that does.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I particularly like Matrix Revolutions. There's just so much in these Matrix sequels, just elements that I dislike almost on a whole. I remember I was listening to, there's a critics commentary on the DVDs and the Blu-ray sets for these two movies. There's philosopher commentaries, there's critics commentaries, and the critics commentaries are talking about, oh God, if I have to sit through another one of these scenes where a fucking council gets together in a sci-fi movie to talk about this. And I was just like, too fucking true, man.
Of the two sequels, Reloaded is the better one, but I still find Revolutions fascinating and bold, incredibly bold, to the point where it pissed off way more people than it made happy, but it did it on its own terms, and I respect that.
I agree. I don't think it was trying to anticipate what fans would want out of it as much as, it had a vision. It was trying to execute it, and it did, to varying degrees of success, based on, how you watch the movie and just sequence by sequence. Yeah, it's definitely something that maybe we should reappraise on the show, but that'll be another time.
I think between, like I said, I did an episode of it with Nick, but I think between you and I, and it's another movie that I would be up for revisiting. That alone says something that it's like, yeah, I would watch that again and take in another viewpoint of it. I think that's the indicator of value. So Matrix Revolutions, I don't know how I'm sure we'll get some comments about that too, but Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf?
This is a film I watched recently, and the reason I'm including it is because I think it's a really good contrast when you're looking at how scenes of dialogue are blocked, as in how are we positioning the actors in the scene, how they're shot, as in what kind of methods are we using to position the camera. Is the camera shooting them straight on? Are we shooting them at a 3/4 angle? Are we shooting them from across the room but using a long lens to kind of compress them against the background? Are we using something wide and getting right up in their faces? Are we just covering a two-person dialogue scene from both sides and cutting it together? What Hustlers does is it constructs dialogue scenes with such clear intentionality. And every cut to a close-up doesn't feel like something they just got in coverage. It feels expertly choreographed to cut to that close-up at that exact moment. It is just a really wonderful coming together of all these elements of, the editor knowing when to cut to the close-up to make it feel particularly impactful, or when to use a scene transition to push a story forward. And this story, in Hustlers takes place over, I guess, 9 years, 10 years, something like that. It's one of the best films I've seen this year. It's directed and written by Lorene Scafaria, who wrote a movie called The Meddler, starring Rose Byrne and Susan Sarandon. That came out a few years ago. It's quite a good movie. And she also wrote Seeking a Friend for the End of the World, which is not quite as good a film. But Lorene Scafaria with Hustlers has sort of defined what I found Rise of Skywalker to be so devoid of.
Yeah, I talked about Hustlers, I think maybe last week or the week before. And it's one of the movies of the year. You got to see it, and I concur completely with your feelings about its cinematography and its approach to framing characters and spaces together and editing. Absolutely, do not skip on Hustlers. Well, we got to do listener shelf picks for last week's Black Christmas triple feature. And we got quite a couple. Loyal listener JT had, I hate to put him on the spot here, but I think the shelf pick of the week, which is for another story with multiple remakes from multiple eras. How about Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Take the same premise, bend it to current fears and topics, and there you go. And I had to comment. I was like, that shelf pick's so good that I'm upset I didn't think of it.
You and I at one point briefly considered doing an episode on Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and we were thinking about different ways to do it. Like, we had an Alien Invasion month. But yeah, I think JT's choice in recommending that, and seeing the parallel between Black Christmas and this is brilliant. So thank you, JT.
Very much so. Loyal listener Mr. Milksteak had the shelf pick of Most Beautiful Island from 2017. It's about an illegal immigrant struggling to make ends meet in New York City who happens upon a job opportunity that thrusts her into a very dark and dangerous life or death situation involving other desperate women like herself and the wealthy elite willing to bet on their lives. I had never heard of this, and it sounds fascinating.
Sounds like Dirty Pretty Things meets Hostel.
I'm down for it. I know nothing more than what Mr. Milksteak has said, and it's on my list. So thank you very much for turning me on to something, Mr. Milksteak. Our good friend Ryan Covey, because he's Ryan Covey and I adore him for this, left a wonderfully verbose response to this episode, and of course had 4 shelf picks. So I urge everybody to go to the Black Christmas post on genrevision.com to see everything. But I picked out the shelf pick that he did for the current Black Christmas 19, because that was kind of what our shelf picks in the episode were for. And he said the Prom Night remake, not only does it sport some good performances from James Ransom and Idris Elba, it is fucking brutal. The movie is very nearly bloodless and the kills aren't creative and unique, but this movie is rough to watch. I have never heard anything about the Prom Night remake.
I have never heard anything good about the Prom Night remake, so I'm surprised.
I mean, Covey always comes in. He always has an opinion that I have never heard from anybody else, and it's one of the reasons I love him. So I'm immediately putting that on my to-watch list because I've never even seen the original Prom Night. I have no attachment to it, so I'm very interested to see exactly what's going on in that remake. So thanks, Ryan. And the last shelf pick is from loyal listener Eric Fuchs, and it was Assassination Nation. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, so we'll come back to that. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
Just very quickly, I played through the 3rd game in the Tomb Raider series, the current Tomb Raider series, and it's called Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and it's pretty much what I expected it to be. It's a pretty clunkily executed game in a lot of different ways, but it certainly does better in the story department than the prior game, which was, I think, Rise of the Tomb Raider. This is, in a lot of ways, the same kind of Uncharted clone that we've seen before, but platforming doesn't feel as good. The shooting doesn't feel as good.
Doesn't feel good.
Yeah, it's a better exploration of its environments, I think, than the prior game was. The prior game took place, I think, somewhere in Siberia, and the story was just so bad in Rise of the Tomb Raider that they really could only go up from here. Luckily, I think they did a better job writing this one with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and they did a better job exploring the environments. But the gameplay mechanics are largely the same, but they lack the kind of necessary polish for the gameplay to feel really, really satisfying. In short, I played it long enough to complete it, and that's, it was a fine experience while it lasted, but certainly not a very memorable one.
Well, on my end, I got to check out I didn't know it was going to be one of my more anticipated movies of the year, but certainly one of the most critically lauded. This is Uncut Gems from the Safdie brothers, who did Good Time, starring Adam Sandler. Everything you've heard about this is true. Wow, what a great film. Completely nerve-wracking. I told you that it gave me agita pretty much the entire way through, and it's not like it's not like a guillotine is hanging over the movie the entire time, but the Safdies just know how to craft a really, really tense atmosphere and plot to their movies, and man, Adam Sandler, he's getting the appropriate amount of praise he should. But I've said this before. I wish that we found a way to use him like this more often, or that he wanted to be used like this more often, because when he comes out and he gives 110% to something we're not expecting of him, he is possibly one of our greatest living actors. He's phenomenal in this. It really is as good as you've heard. It's funny. It's terrifying at times. It's tense. It's wonderful, and wonderful filmmaking. There's some stuff in this that I was not expecting. As far as, I don't want to spoil anything, and it's not like a spoiler, but I was just very surprised at what the kind of language of the movie is playing with in certain points. This was, I didn't know this. It was apparently produced by Martin Scorsese, and fits in that wheelhouse without feeling like a copycat of what he does. I mean, yeah, I know that's high praise, and it's deserved. I don't miss out on this. If you can see it before the end of the year, do not miss Uncut Gems. Well, let's wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And we're coming back to Eric Fuchs and his shelf pick of Assassination Nation, talking about Black Christmas and saying that it's lurid, it's stylist, it's utterly fearless. And his feelings about Black Christmas, he said, Black Christmas 2019 is blunt, but also weakened by its rating. It should be this huge, grungy, ultra-violent celebration of gore that can be so over the top its message is just a bit winked at. Instead, it's so safe, it really doesn't feel like just a... Instead, it's so safe, it really does feel just... Damn it. Instead, it's so safe, it really does feel like just a Twitter argument on screen. The movie needed a climax like the end of the new Suspiria. Literally buckets of blood all over the floor as a satisfying release. Instead, it's just, well, you can see what Eric said for the rest of this, but I kind of like 80% agree with him. I don't think it needed to be a grungy, ultra-violent celebration of gore, but I think he made a very good point about, if you're going to be blunt and aggressive with your messaging like Black Christmas 2019 was, I think the tone and execution should try to meet you on the same level.
Well, and I think it's similar to my argument about the film. It's like genre cinema or genre storytelling affords you the opportunity to use really grand metaphors, and sometimes the metaphors can be as grand as they are at the end of Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. Like, if you've seen the climax of that film, it just goes all out. And I don't mean just in terms of gore, but like in terms of the metaphors really coming alive and being extraordinarily blunt. But at least it's doing it through the use of metaphor and not just baldly stating its intentions.
Right. I mean, like I say, if you want to make your feelings that well known, that's okay if the movie reflects that feeling in its execution. And I think that was one of our issues with Black Christmas 2019 was it felt incredibly in your face as far as what it was saying, but the movie wasn't in your face. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it was trying to be in your face and topical through the use of certain types of catchphrases and keywords that people recognize from social media and also from just socio-political interaction in the United States in the 20th century.
21st.
And 21st. You know, certain feminist catchphrases in that film have been around a long time.
Sure.
But there's a way of doing that, I think, potentially more artfully through use of metaphor. And gore can certainly be a metaphor. You know, that kind of extreme violence can certainly act as a metaphor. It's a very direct metaphor, but, you know, sometimes like, shit, I almost want to spoil exactly what happens during the end of Suspiria, but I really think more people should just see that movie and I should shut up about it.
Yeah. If you learn anything from our Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker episode, it's see Luca Guadagnino's Suspiria. So yeah, like again, if you want to hear it, because we're going to talk a lot more about this, please check out patreon.com/genrevision. We think it'll be worth your time. But if you're just listening to this episode, we want to thank you so much. It really does mean the world to us. We'll talk to you next. Well, actually, no, we won't talk to you next week. We're next week's going to be our holiday break, and then we'll be back in the new year with our top 15 episode of 2019. Also gives us a little time to play catch up.
And Patreon listeners, be on the lookout for our monthly Currently Consuming. I think we're still planning on doing that.
Yes, that will still be happening.
But we'll be taking a week off the regular scheduled show.
So yeah, if you, I would say for the end of the year, because this will be our last episode of this year, we hope your 2019 was okay. It's been a weird year, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in our Patreon, end of the year, Currently Consuming thing. But it's been a crazy year for Genre Vision. It's been a great year for Genre Vision, and we couldn't be more thankful and happy that you've been along for the ride. So we'll see you all in 2020. As always, I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you in 2020.
Do it.
I'm Genre Vision. Skywalker.
I think your Palpatine's better than my Palpatine.
Thank you, but
do it.
He said do it in this.
He did say do it. And I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of people who really love all his really corny dialogue from Revenge of the Sith that like this in this movie. And you know what? More power to him, because I kind of liked that stuff in this movie too.
Yeah.
The vocal effects used on the Emperor voice in this film are pretty cool. There's just like a big bassy rumble, a big sort of cathedral reverb. It's nice.
You'll pay the price for your lack of vision.
He even says good in this. He goes, good.
I mean, they've brought back all of the old hits.
The only hit they didn't bring back, which has always been my favorite Emperor Palpatine line, is when Luke is looking at the lightsaber on his throne. He goes, "Oh, you want this, don't you?"
That's a delicious one. My least favorite Palpatine line has to come from Revenge of the Sith, where he looks at, I think it's Mace Windu, and he goes, "No, no, no," and I'm like,
You will die.
yeah,
I mean, Revenge of the Sith has some good ones. It's got,
I am the Senate.
sure.
I can't remember if it's Revenge of the Sith or Attack of the Clones, but he's like, "I love democracy." Can we just replace this entire review episode with Emperor Palpatine quotes?
No.
See you all in 2020.